welcome again to Talking Sunday Readings. My name is Tim, and I'm joined as always by Ann Carter and by Pastor Dick Stadler. And we're going to be talking about the readings that you might hear in church this coming Sunday. And those readings are going to be from Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 to 10. A reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, from 31b to chapter 13, verse 13. And then the last reading is going to be from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verses 21 to 44.
A reading from Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant.
This Jeremiah reading is interesting. It's one that's very familiar, at least to me. I've heard it before. But one thing that stood out to me this time that was, I don't know, struck me as kind of odd is, so the Lord is talking to him and he's kind of protests and says that I don't even know how to speak. I am too young. And God says, don't say you're too young. And I'm wondering, how old was he? How old is too young? What kind of age range can we guess that he was in if we don't know for sure? And then kind of jumping off of that, he puts a pretty heavy responsibility on him here, especially at the very end here. I think verse 10, he says, See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. That is a lot to ask of somebody who is very young. So I'm wondering how old was he, and why was he chosen to have this massive responsibility? Mm-hmm. So either of you would like to take a stab at that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's a good question, and the scriptures don't answer it for us emphatically. Different people have assumed that he was, as a prophet, in his 20s, maybe even early 30s, and that this is a rhetorical device that many people who are called upon to serve God say, I'm too young, or I'm just a child. You remember that even Solomon said that when he came to the monarchy, and he wasn't a 6-year-old. He's already done a bunch of things. And so that just may be a rhetorical device that was a common expression. Now, maybe some other commentators have evidence for making other suggestions. I don't know. Ann, have you read anything?
No, I haven't, but I was thinking of Moses, who told God that he stuttered and he couldn't possibly go in front of Pharaoh.
Yeah.
So I think it's an excuse. I think that we can easily, quickly give God an excuse when he gives us something that is daunting.
And Isaiah will say the same thing when God calls him to speak for him, that he is a man of unclean lips. So how on earth can I represent you, the clean God, the holy God? Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably as good answers we're going to be able to come to, because there's just not a lot of evidence in the scriptures.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions you have?
Well, I would like to just jump back to your why was he chosen now to speak to kingdoms? I think Jeremiah was chosen at a time when there was great political upheaval. There was the Assyrians had been there, the Babylonians were coming, the Egyptians had come up, there was turnover in the monarchy in Israel. He was speaking to kingdoms and he was speaking to leaders and authorities, and he was telling them the truth, and they didn't want to hear it. And when you don't listen to the truth, when you don't listen to God, when he tells you something, there are not good consequences for that. When God gives you a choice to change your mind and you don't do it, then things happen, like plucking up and pulling down, destroying and overthrowing. Things were going to happen. God was giving everybody a chance, and they chose not to listen to Jeremiah. As a matter of fact, they threw him down a well. They tried to kill him. They tried all sorts of things. These guys were not shrinking violets. These prophets, man, they were abused, and they stood their ground.
And he kept urging the people of Israel, just resign yourself to God's will, because God's will is that the Babylonians are going to discipline you and they're going to crush you. And they tried everything else except listen to him. And that breaking down did occur in Jerusalem when Babylon swept in 586 BC. So his prophecy came true eventually, but as Anne said, he was really mistreated. He was finally taken prisoner to Egypt at the end of his prophecy, we're told. And so there's a lot of church tradition about what happened to him, or that he sawed in half, or other things happened to him, but we just don't have any biblical evidence for what happened to him when he completed his mission for God. And it was even though people didn't listen to him, it was still a successful mission, because he preached faithfully what God instructed him to teach. And so he didn't just try to win popularity by telling people what they wanted to hear. He told them the uncomfortable truth, and he was faithful to that. So that makes him a very successful prophet. He didn't knuckle under. So
yeah.
I think all three of these readings can illustrate the same theme, and we can look for that in all these readings, and that is that God definitely equips those whom he calls. And so a lot of people have said, well, I couldn't ever do that. The point is, if God calls you to do something, he will equip you to do it. And here's a good case where God gave him a terrible assignment. Who would want to have that kind of a reaction to your preaching? But God equipped him to do it, and he was faithful, and he did it. So,
yeah. Well, on that note, unless there's anything else, I figure we'll roll right into 1 Corinthians.
A reading from 1 Corinthians. Now eagerly desire the greater gifts, and yet I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love.
Excuse me. This is a very famous passage. Hear it at pretty much every wedding that you might attend. Somebody's always reading this passage.
Pretty much misunderstood too.
Well, that's
Largely misunderstood.
okay. Because it's talking about love. Love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, and all of that. And what struck me this time hearing it is why did he feel the need to go through this kind of lengthy description and definition of love, and what was going on at the time that he felt this needed to be, written down in this letter and sent off to them? Was it something they were doing? Was it something that was happening at the time? And as you just said, what are we missing about this? What are we misunderstanding about this passage? So I'll let you take it away there.
Well, let me jump in because I just really sometimes am bewildered by how this passage is used. A lot of people think that the love that's being talked about all through chapter 13 is the love that we're supposed to show for each other, or the love that we're supposed to show for God. And they don't understand that when Paul talks about love, he's talking about it always starting, so does John in his epistles. It always starts with God's love for us. And then our love is simply a fruit of that faith in God's love. And if you remember the context, chapters 12 and 11 are especially talking about gifts within the church. And then he says at the very end of chapter 12, where this reading begins, he says, do you all do all these different gifts that he's been talking about? Earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you a more excellent way. And then he launches into chapter 13. So the more excellent way is to receive the love that God has for you. Because if you don't start there, if you start getting busy doing loving things and acting loving and so forth, thinking that that's what God wants you to do, that's certainly a byproduct of receiving his love. But you got to start in the right starting point. And that is to, first of all, humble yourself and be appreciative and receive God's love for you. And if you do that, you could take the word love here and substitute God in every one of the places where it is. And it's describing for us what godly love is like. God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy. God is not irritable. God is not resentful. God bears all things. I mean, it just all describes God's unbelievably gracious love for us, undeserved love. And so I think that's a good reminder to all of us. And that may be why he puts this in here as if people are using their gifts or their tongue speaking or whatever gift they think they have as a way of playing one-upsmanship on other Christians, he's saying that there is a more excellent way. And that is to start off, first of all, with God's love for you and to acknowledge you need it, that you haven't earned it. And then you can copy all these things, but the power source will be there. Just a thought.
Mhm. The book of 1 Corinthians is Paul writing from Ephesus to this church in Corinth. And the church is this brand new, I don't know if experiment will put people off, but it's something new. It's Jews and Gentiles together, men and women together, slave and free, rich and poor, all together, forming this new community and this new family that has Jesus as the head. Everything is about Jesus. And the book of 1 Corinthians is all about how we get along, how we work together in the church as leaders of the church with special gifts. How do we put Jesus at the center so that he can lead us forward? And this chapter is the culmination of all of it, is how do we work together? We work together in love. How can we work together in love? Jesus already did it for us. Everything, by whom and in whom and with whom is all things. That's Jesus. Everything that we are is him. And Paul has to remind this church of that, because we've talked about Corinth. It was a Wild West show. And it's a new way of being, and people needed instruction over and over again on how the best way to be was.
It's as if Paul is reminding the Corinthians, you're not suns, you're not supernovas, you're not producing the light or even the love all by yourself. You are more like the moon. you are reflecting the love that has been shined toward you by God and by Jesus. And so let it shine, let it warm your heart, let it fill you with his kind of love, and then it will come from you effortlessly. You won't have to force it. You won't have to discipline yourself to be more loving, because when you fall into that trap, then what you've done is you've made your fruits of faith into good works you have to do to be certain that God still loves you. And that's got everything upside down. It's God's love for us, no matter what. That's grace, undeserved love. And if we receive that, then we're better equipped to maybe love people that we otherwise would say they're not worth loving. And that's not the way God looks at us. Thank God he doesn't look at us that way. And so sometimes I have to pray, Lord, give me the heart of Jesus. Give me the love of Jesus, because I'm having a hard time loving this one segment, whether they be child abusers or perverts or whatever they are. So we all have to work at that.
Mhm.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath, in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Then he went down to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and on the Sabbath he taught the people. They were amazed at his teaching, because his words had authority. In the synagogue there was a man possessed by a demon, an impure spirit. He cried out at the top of his voice, "Go away! What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before them all, and came out without injuring him. All the people were amazed and said to each other, "What words these are! With authority and power he gives orders to impure spirits, and they come out," and the news about him spread throughout the surrounding area. Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over her and rebuked the fever, and it let her go. She got up at once and began to wait on them. At sunset the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. Moreover, demons came out of many people, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them, and would not allow them to speak, because they knew he was the Messiah. At daybreak Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving them. But he said, "I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent." And he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea.
Well, we'll move on then into the Gospel of Luke. This is chapter 4. This is another one that's similar and or is familiar, I guess. And one thing that I noticed that stuck out to me, this one covers several different sort of events that happens that Jesus does or happens around him. And one thing that kept coming up was this idea of authority. That Jesus, it says that Jesus spoke with authority, that Jesus taught with authority, that he had authority over a demon. And I'm wondering if the word authority has a different meaning or a different context. Are they talking, is it a power that he has? Is it just that he's really confident and he's speaking with great confidence? Or is there something sort of an aura about him that made people kind of shut up and listen? And because there's a modern context, I guess, of what authority means, but I'm wondering if it's if there's something different going on here, and what is the best way that we can understand the authority that we have, or that is referenced here.
Well, if you take the view that a lot of films have when they've tried to portray him, he's glowing and he's radiating this halo, and he's got this unbelievably handsome face and dark eyes and dark hair. No, I think that in the context of rabbinic teaching, the rabbis would quote the sages, and they would quote and have different authorities that they would quote. Jesus didn't ever do that. He is the living word. He is the one who inspired the word as a member of the Trinity. And so when he stood there, it must have amazed people. He didn't quote any other rabbis. He just simply told them, here's what it means. Guess what? I'm here, and I'm the Messiah, and what they're talking about is me. So I think that was the sense of the authority that he had, that he didn't have to quote somebody else in order to shore up his argument or his revelation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm. And we've talked about the word authority many times. And Dick, you'll have to explain a little bit more about the word kafale, what it really means. But there's this sense also with authority that it is a support system underneath from which things grow. And when Jesus is love, he is this groundswell of compassion and concern, and almost a shield around people that bad things will not happen to them. So the sickness that is in them cannot stay when Jesus is around, and the demons cannot stay when Jesus is there, because when evil meets pure good, it cannot survive. So there's, I don't want to use the word radiant because we just kind of dismiss that, but there's something very charismatic about Jesus. People are drawn to him, and I think it's because he's just compassion, and he cares. He likes people. He doesn't just love them from afar. He likes them, and he hangs out with them, and he has dinner with them, and people are drawn, and there's power in that, being drawn to someone like that.
Especially when people have been marginalized in their own culture. And here comes Jesus, and he doesn't marginalize them anymore. He invites the prostitutes, the sinners, the tax collectors, all the people who are on the perimeter. And so that must have been very engaging and very attractive. In fact, all of us would like to be with a person like that, rather than someone who is constantly putting us down and constantly criticizing us. And so in the two episodes that are also in this text, the healing of the demoniac and also the healing of Peter's mother, you see him, this really fits Epiphany. He's really manifesting to the world that he is the great healer that Anna was talking about, the one who brought love that is active and embracing. And so it's kind of neat to see that. Now, Ann, do you want to show your pictures? Do you want me to show my pictures of Capernaum so we can locate where all this happened?
Yeah, why don't you show yours if you've got them?
Let me try to share the screen here. Okay. There. Can you see that? Okay. Capernaum is right up on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. And I'm thankful to Anne for having found these pictures, because I put them in this collection. And this model shows what Capernaum may have looked like based on the archaeology that's been done there. And the synagogue in which he heals the demoniac and does his preaching is right in the middle of town. And everything is close together in Capernaum. The house of Peter, where his mother-in-law is lying with a fever, is right across town from the synagogue. And we're talking about less than a 60-second walk from the synagogue through the streets to get there. And then this aerial view kind of shows the proximity. They have now built a church. I think the church goes back to the 4th century or the 8th century, and it's been revised and redone. But they built a church over what they think was Peter's house, because there was a very old Byzantine 8-sided building down there, and that usually indicates something that they believe goes back to the time of Jesus. Wow. And the synagogue that you can visit today when you go is really not the synagogue that Jesus was talking in. It was built in the 4th century, and it is built, however, on the foundation of the 1st century synagogue, made all in this black basalt stone that is common for that area. This lighter limestone had to be brought in, because you don't find this in the local area at all. And so as you look from Peter's house toward the synagogue, you could see all these remains of the houses, and they were all packed together and very close together. And as you look east, they still haven't excavated tons of the area around Capernaum. But now we're standing on the synagogue steps, and we're looking toward where Peter's house would have been, and that'd be underneath that church where they've now built that. They still have services there. So that kind of gives you a feel for how close everything was. And so Jesus, after he gets done at the synagogue, goes to Peter's house. There's people there that are waiting to be healed, and his mother-in-law is there, and he heals her. And first thing she does is jump up and start serving people. So I'll stop sharing unless do either of you have any thoughts on these pictures?
No, just a great
You just, I think it helps people to visualize when they listen to the reading in church, to be able to picture this in their mind's eye. I want to thank Anne for all those pictures. A lot of them are directly borrowed from your collection.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Do you have other questions you want to proceed with, Tim? Or I have a few comments that I was hoping to make before we run out of time.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay, well, I found it very interesting because, like you said, Tim, every time you read things, different things pop out at you. And this time, in verse 22, Jesus is still in Nazareth, and he's in the synagogue, and he has just read, and people are amazed, and they say, "Is not this Joseph's son?" They wonder amongst themselves, who is this guy? Isn't he Joseph's son? Then jump to Capernaum, and we have Jesus identified by a demon as, "You are the Holy One of God." I just thought that was fascinating, that within a few verses, we've got people doubting him, and we've got this manifestation of who he really is from a spiritual dark guy. But I just found that fascinating. And again, I don't have any, I don't have any explanation for it. Do we want to pause here? Where did Tim, here he's back. Okay. The other comment that I wanted to make, we talked about it once, that Jesus passed through the midst of them and went on his way. And I wanted to relate that back to Jeremiah, where God tells Jeremiah as his prophet, "Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you." And we talk about Jesus being a prophet and a priest and a king. And as a prophet, what he says is going to come true. And as a prophet, he is going to be protected until such time as God says it's time for you to come home. Or you have to finish what I need for you to the task for which I've assigned you. But I thought that was a good tie in the New Testament to the Old Testament prophecy.
Well, and we've talked about this when we've discussed the healing of demoniacs in other locations, that he refuses to let them identify him.
Mhm.
That's his job, to reveal himself. And that's what Epiphany is all about, his manifestation of himself and his divine character and his attributes and so forth. And that's also the job of his church. It's not the job of demons. So in every
Mhm.
case, almost he muzzles the demons, says, no, I don't want you telling people who I am. And there may have been a timing issue too. This is still early in his ministry, and he may not have wanted to have all the blowback that he knew was going to come when he started revealing to people, I am the Messiah, I am the Christ that you've been looking for. But even the demons recognize who he is. And so that's kind of an incidental piece of Epiphany too that's going on next.
Mhm.
But all of these miracles are done with all kinds of people around him, with eyewitnesses. So it's just driving home the point that Jesus is constantly manifesting himself and giving evidence of who he is
Mhm.
for us.
Yeah, I thought it was also very interesting, once again, that these are real stories. They are, we know that because the people waited until sundown before they came to see Jesus. The Sabbath ends at sundown, so they waited until then. It's just a nice little cultural, these actually happened. And that's what's fun too, to recognize that.
And he's not afraid to break the oral Torah prohibitions that maybe the religious leaders in town felt that he shouldn't be healing on the Sabbath.
Mhm.
And he dares to ask them, well, is it okay to heal on the Sabbath and do good? And even the Jews had a tradition that said that if somebody's life is in danger or is in jeopardy, you can break the Sabbath and go ahead and do what you have to do to help them. And so even the Jews of Jesus' day had that understanding.
Mhm. Very good. Well, I think, Dick, since we're experiencing just a few technical difficulties, maybe it's time that we wrap this one up.
You bet. Thank you very much, Ann. Thank you,
Yep.
Timmy.
Thank you. We will see you next time, everybody, on Talking Sunday Readings.